All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us online and here in the room. My name is Ryan Meyer. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Community and Citizen Science here at UC Davis. Just a super high-level overview of our group here. We are based in the School of Education, and we conduct research on lots of different forms of citizen science, community science, public participation, and research. Across a lot of different environmental issues and with a lot of different kinds of partners. And we convene these Collabinar series in order to stimulate dialogue about that and not just hear about projects, but get into conversations about challenges and opportunities in the field. So really excited for the session here today. Before we go any further, Sarah, I think already asked folks to introduce themselves. It'd be great to just have a sense of where folks are coming from. Thank you very much. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are gathered on here today. For thousands of years, this land has been home to the Patwin people. And today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: the Quetzaldehi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzaldehi Wintun Nation, and Yochidehi Wintun Nation. And the Patwin people have been committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries, and it has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations, and we are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. So with that, I want to pass it over to Sarah Angulo, who's going to explain a little bit more about the structure of the day, and thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm the Community Education and Outreach Specialist here at the center. And so I'm going to describe our Collabinar. So really they invite colleagues from across the globe to present their most exciting developments and challenges in the field of community and citizen science. Attending the Collabinar are people who engage with community and citizen science at different levels, as we're seeing now as people introduce themselves in the chat. This 1-hour session aims to foster an environment of mutual learning, and it's less of a formal structure of webinar as it is a discussion on the topic or a project brought to us by the presenters. So throughout our time together, I'll monitor the chats, and you should feel free to post your thoughts and questions there. We'll answer anything pressing as we go along, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for an open discussion. So finally, again, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll share the link to that, if it's okay with you all, after the meeting, as well as some great materials to follow up on what the presenters are bringing here today for us. And we'll have Diego, who is our intern here at the center and Bradshaw Scholar, introduce our presenters.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. And my name is Diego, as mentioned by Sarah. I'm a recent UC Davis graduate and intern here at the center. And our presenters today are Allie Dumas and Jean Werka, and they will be describing citizen science efforts underway at the Center for Land-Based Learning's Farm and Climate Program and the Student Landowner Education and Watershed Stewardship Program. So today, the topics discussed include how the Center for Land-Based Learning can involve more people in their citizen science opportunities. And now a little more about our presenters today. Allie Dumas is an environmental educator with experience in multiple states. She holds a bachelor's in international studies with a minor in biology from Kenyon University and a master's in science education from the University of Washington. In her role at the Center for Land-Based Learning, she leads the SLEWS program, helping high school students explore their local environment and discover career opportunities in environmental science. Thank you for joining us today, Allie. And Jean Werka is an ecologist leading the Farm and Climate Program at the Center for Land-Based Learning in Woodland, California. Her focus is on carbon farming and habitat restoration to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. She holds a master's in ecology from UC Davis, go Aggies, and a bachelor's from Harvard University. Thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much. Awesome. Well, my name, as Diego said, is Allie Dumas. I am the SLEWS program manager. I'm going to give us a little bit of an intro into CLBL before we kind of get started with SLEWS and our Farm and Climate program. So in case you are not familiar with the Center for Land-Based Learning, our mission is to inspire, educate, and cultivate future generations of farmers, agricultural leaders, and natural resource stewards. We are based out of Woodland, California, but we work all across the state. And we also support organizations outside of the state of California through things like this, making sure that we're always working to keep our programs up to date and meet the needs of the local community. Just a brief background on our California Farm Academy. This is more focused in adult education, but also has some youth education involved as well. Our California Farm Academy is basically working to bring the next generation of farmers into the space of agriculture. Through the Farm Business and Incubator Program, we lease land to folks who are interested in actually building their farm for a subsidized price. Beginning Farmer Training Program works to teach people through a 7-month program how you can actually run your own farm with a business plan being completed at the end of that 7 months. The Farm Manager Apprenticeship Program works to help people learn how to be actual farm ranch managers. So if you don't want to have your actual farm, but you want to help to manage one, that's a big piece of it. It's a 2-year apprenticeship program. Community Food Program works to reach out to those communities that don't have easy access to food. So we have a mobile market that works mostly right now in West Sacramento, but we have one actually opening up in Woodland as well. Stay tuned for that. We're really excited to see it come to fruition. And then the Farm and Climate Program, which we'll talk about today, that, while we have it underneath our adult education, also integrates really well to all of our youth programs. And I'll let Jeannie talk about that as we get to it later. Some more things that we'll talk about today with our youth programs. We have our FARMS program, which is our foundational program. That stands for Farming and Agriculture through Resource Management and Sustainability. We love acronyms here. That program was really created to help get students into agriculture, teach them that they could move into that space. That started in 1993, and it kind of was like the kickstart for all of Center for Land-Based Learning's programs. From that came the SLEWS program, the Student Landowner Education and Watershed Stewardship program. It was understood that for this program, we're having a big restoration crisis. We had all this work that needed to get done, but we didn't have the people to do it. And so that's where SLEWS came in, utilizing students to not only have the education side, but also complete necessary restoration projects. Later, as CLBL grew, we had the Caring for Our Watershed program. It's a grant proposal process for students. This is actually an international contest. Students have the ability to apply and share grants that they believe will help in their local community. They can think about, do they want to install recycling in their school? What about composting? What can they do to help their watershed? They'll get judged in this contest, and then the top 10 receive a scholarship award. There's also a few students who also get to do implementation that we also provide funds for. And then the final youth program that we also have is our urban agricultural internships. This functions mostly out of Sacramento, and is based out of Grant Union High School and Luther Burbank. It's an opportunity for the students in those areas to not only get exposure to agriculture, but also learn what it's like to have an actual internship and be able to work with school to supplement any funds that they need for their community. So I'm going to pass it off to Jeannie to talk a little bit more about our Farm and Climate program and specifically more about what we're here today.
Okay. Can I just have you, when I need to advance it, I'll just have you. Okay. So a couple of years ago, we started what we call the Farm and Climate program. And the reason we chose climate as the founding principle of this program is because there's just more and more evidence out there that agricultural lands are one of our best resources for actually drawing down CO2, atmospheric CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in soil over the long term. And we're based in Yolo County, and I know it varies throughout California, but 85% of the land in Yolo County is designated for agricultural use. It's the single largest resource that the county has for addressing climate change. So we're working with farmers and ranchers and technical service providers to encourage more farmers to implement practices that will help draw down CO2. So next balloon here. And there, no time like the present. Of course, California's goal is to become carbon neutral by 2045. Yolo County's goal is Yolo neutral by 2030, which I keep reminding myself is in just a little over 6 years. So, no time to waste. And again, there's more and more evidence that by improving management of natural and working lands, we can really help draw down some of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. Next. The governor of California talks a lot about natural solutions, and so I wanted to define those. They're basically any measure that increases the rate at which carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and then stored either in above ground biomass of plants or in the soil. These measures, compared to some of the high-tech solutions that are being proposed right now for drawing down CO2, they're things we already know how to do. They're affordable, we can do it, and they can scale up. And costs relative to some of the higher tech options out there, the costs are relatively low. And when we're talking about the ag landscape, among the types of practices we're talking about are things like cover cropping, adding compost to soil, reducing the amount of tillage, growing perennial crops and orchards, planting hedgerows and windbreaks, riparian restoration. Anything where you're adding permanent vegetation to the landscape is going to help with climate change.
And we'll share in this presentation, you have that link.
Yeah,
Cool.
And then of course, even if the main reason we're doing all these things is to draw down carbon dioxide, there's also all these co-benefits, both environmental and social, biodiversity, water security, soil health, air quality and water quality, and wildfire resilience. And then of course, there's social and economic goals. Can you advance the slide? One of the things I like to point out is, so Yolo County is in the process of redoing its climate action and adaptation plan, and they've made a real effort to focus on a just transition to an inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and resilient local economy, recognizing that the only way to have a viable climate action plan is to make sure we are not leaving out vulnerable and marginalized communities who have historically suffered the most from climate impacts. So that brings us to our actual farm and climate program. We sort of have 4 main pillars. The first one of those is carbon farming. And essentially, if you're not familiar with that term, go ahead. What carbon farming, it's like a conservation plan for a farm or a ranch. It's an effort to take a look at a whole farm or ranch. What are the opportunities there to implement practices? So the little mappy thing you see up there, that's an outgrowth of the carbon farm plan that we have at our own farm. We have about 30 acres of farmland in Woodland associated with our headquarters, and those are some of the practices that we've identified. And we started what's called the Yolo Carbon Farming Partnership, where we're working with the Yolo Resource Conservation District and the Carbon Cycle Institute and Yolo Land Trust to try to get this, to try to get more landowners interested in doing these types of plants. So that partnership is underway. One of the other main pillars of this program is habitat restoration. So at our site in Woodland, we have installed all kinds of practices at our farm, hedgerows, we're doing a windbreak, all types of native grass plantings in order to restore the habitat and also sequester CO2. We are planning a big riparian restoration project on Cache Creek. And we've installed a bunch of habitat enhancements, things like nest boxes for bluebirds and tree swallows and things like that. And then of course, research, and I'll talk about this more when we get into the citizen science elements, but one of the really nice things about our project is we actually just moved to this farm, our headquarters in May of 2020. So it's sort of a brand new space and it gives us the opportunity to do baseline monitoring of things like biodiversity, pollinators, soil health. So we're actually able to track what are the impacts of each of these practices as we implement them. And so research is really a foundational element of this whole program. We have another a very specific research project we're partnering with UC Davis on, looking at the impacts of biochar and compost in a brand new olive orchard. So that also has some research opportunities that could be turned into citizen science as well. And then, of course, outreach. So our farm and climate program hosts workshops. We will be doing some trainings. We have a lot of visitors who come by the farm. Every now and then, when you have visitors, you can actually have the barn owls actually perform for them, like that happened this day. It was really nice.
Cool.
And then we're also working directly with Yolo County to do outreach specifically around their climate action and adaptation plan. So we're actually helping them get the word out to all the communities in Yolo County, both rural and urban, different socioeconomic groups, to make sure everybody has a say in what happens. So we're considered their outreach partner on this effort. And I will turn it back over to Allie.
Awesome. So another great piece that kind of leads into this is the SLEWS program. So right now we are facing a current reality of a climate crisis. There was a study that was presented, it was back in 2021, I believe, that surveyed over 10,000 young folks from 18 to 25 years old. And this was international. It's a really cool study to see. But one of the biggest things that people were seeing is that more than half of the folks who participated in the study were feeling emotions of sadness, anger, anxiety, guilt, all surrounded around this concept of climate change. And so, we feel with our current programming, it's really important to make sure that we're addressing these topics, especially because it's not going away. It's something that we are going to have to face as a community, so why not now? With the SLEWS program, as I discussed a little bit earlier, this came to be in about 2001 is when Center for Land-Based Learning created this programming. It was a combination between the Audubon California's Land Stewardship program and then Center for Land-Based Learning's FARMS program. The goal is to engage high school students in hands-on habitat restoration that also feeds into enhancing their local knowledge, understanding that it's very important to physically see how you can make an impact in your community. We also integrate classroom learning. So if you're in the United States, the next generation science standards are a very big piece of our high school education right now. And then also at the same time, developing their leadership skills. They get the opportunity to interact with local resource professionals who are mentors of our programming and learn about what it means to present yourself. Think about how you can get into an internship. What does it look like to move in that field when it comes to college and career opportunities? So our program, I think, is very uniquely fit into this space, especially in Northern California, with the hopes to extend it through a Train the Trainer program across the state. And in case you aren't familiar with our projects, we span, like I said, all the way across the state of California, with the bulk of our projects happening in Northern California. If you were to put all of the hedgerows that we've planted from 2001 to present, it would stretch over 152 miles of hedgerow. That, for those who are in California, is more than the distance from Sacramento to Reno, if you were to do a straight line there. And we said it's over 750,000 tons of carbon is sequestered per year, which is amazing. Really, really big number, and we just keep growing every year. I'd say we plant probably about 3 miles minimum a year of hedgerow, which is really cool to see that impact. So biggest question is, what's the larger impact? What are we really talking about here today? So as a result of our program, like I said, our students do get access to mentorship and career opportunities. This is where, we are looking for people in the community to be a part of our programming. We really do need local resource professionals to want to work with our students. The way our program works is we see students 3 days throughout the year. Once would be in October, November, December. Another would be in January, February, and then we have the third and final field day in February or March. The goal of our projects is not only to expose students to local restoration projects, but also help them see a project start to finish that they can point out to their community, say they made an impact here, and then also come away seeing a possible opportunity to move into the environmental science fields. This is a very big piece of outreach like we were talking about. So if you're local to the community, we do have our mentor flyers that we'll be sharing later. And I highly, highly, highly suggest that you reach out to us about what that opportunity means for you. Another big piece of it is the direct and positive impact. So as I said, students actually get to see what that community is, but then also the landowners who we work with get that benefit. They see an increase in carbon sequestration, they see water retention, and they actually see an increase in pollinators and local habitat. Maybe there's less bunnies that are eating their food and staying in the habitat instead. And then the third and final thing that I always love to talk about is the leadership and team building experience. This program wouldn't work without the restoration and the education. It has to have both. And the leadership opportunity not only teaches students to be advocates for community, but also advocates for themselves and their, just in their classroom, learning how they can take that leadership step. We teach everything from what is a local habitat, native plant species, to what does it mean to introduce yourself to an interviewer. How can you actually be involved in the process of moving into the field of environmental science. And as we shift kind of into the citizen science piece of it today, I just want you all to think about how we can integrate citizen science into the SLEWS program, and understanding I don't necessarily have an answer right now. That's kind of the question for me, is I'm trying to figure out how can I really integrate it more so, especially when we don't have a lot of access to technology. A lot of our projects are out in the middle of Yolo County in a random space that's like an hour away without any cell service. So we're really trying to figure out how can we make citizen science more apparent to our students and bridge that gap with access. So I'll pass it off to Jeannie to talk about our citizen science opportunities on the Maples Farm.
Great. So as I mentioned, the research is really important to our farm and climate program because we want to be able to have data to show that what we're doing is actually having an impact. And we were able to get in on the ground floor at the beginning of the life of this farm that we're now working and living at, not living at, but it feels that way sometimes. So these are just a few of the monitoring protocols and data gathering tasks that we're currently doing, and all of them are open to a citizen science viewpoint or participation. We've had AmeriCorps volunteers last year who were a big part of the program. They did a lot of this work, and we've had volunteers doing some of this work, and we're just very open to engaging in partnerships where we can get people out to help with these types of monitoring. So they include things like, so for all of our hedgerows have had a real emphasis on native pollinators, especially monarch butterflies. So we've partnered with the Xerxes Society. They've given us a bunch of plants, lots of milkweed, and they have this, what they call the streamlined protocol, bee monitoring protocol for assessing pollinator habitat. It's a very basic, pretty easy monitoring protocol. You basically are just counting bees and counting anything that's not a honeybee as a native bee. So you don't have to have the skills to actually identify down to the species or even to the genus. But what you would do is you'd be walking along a transect in our hedgerow and looking for like that little guy up in the upper left-hand corner. That's a native tunneling bee. And you can tell right away from comparing it with a honeybee, that's not a honeybee. So that's about the level of skill that you need for this activity. And we do that several times a year, mostly in the spring at each of our hedgerows. We will have, by the end of next year, we're going to have 8 hedgerows at our farm. We currently have 4. And we're putting in 5, 6, and 7 this coming up fall. So there's just a ton of plants that can be monitored, and somebody, a school or a community group could make one of their hedgerows their project. They could adopt it, and then that would be their data collection site. So that's really exciting to me. Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption, but there's no photographing involved there. It's literally just counting, in a set time frame, kind of like rates on flower project.
Yeah, it's a certain amount, it's a certain distance for a certain amount of time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're traveling.
You're traveling along a transect.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, you're not stationary. You're moving for I think it's 100 feet for 7.5 minutes. That's one transect.
Gotcha.
So
wow.
yeah,
so it's
there's
tailored for a hedgerow.
It's, well, actually, they have several different protocols. It could be in a field, it can be along a riparian area, or it can be a hedgerow, and they have different protocols for each of those. It could even be a garden, like a school garden would work with their protocol. Then the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has what they call their Project Nest Watch, where you can register your nest boxes. So we've got some little, I think those are tree swallows in that nest down in the lower left-hand corner. We have about 30 songbird nest boxes at our farm. All of them are enrolled in Project Nest Watch. And this is a super fun thing to do because you do take pictures on this one, and you get really good pictures like that one.
Yep.
And essentially what it requires is during the breeding season, which goes from about March through July, initially you make a visit one time each week to each of the nest boxes. And then as the eggs get hatched, it's more like twice a week, and you have to go through each box and record data and then upload it onto the web. And it's super valuable. And we've already shown that just between last year and this year, the number of successful fledged young has more than doubled. So we're very happy with our nest box program. And that's also a project that can be replicated anywhere. Anybody who has a nest box can sign it up for Project Nest Watch and do it themselves. So that's pretty exciting. There's also in the upper right-hand corner, you can't really tell what that is. It's a little aluminum tag on one of our oak trees. So I don't know how many people are familiar with the USA National Phenology Network, but it's a nationwide group of scientists who are looking at what are the changes that are taking place in the phenology of animals and plants. And phenology just means the timing, like when do things flower, when do they go to fruit, when do they shed their leaves, when do they bud out, and that type of thing. So they have an app that you can get on your phone called Nature's Notebook. And so all over the world, really, but especially in this country and in California, there are what are called phenology trails, where citizen scientists are engaged in collecting data at different points of the year. All you need to know is what you're looking for. There's some training involved, but it's once you know what you're looking for, it's pretty straightforward. So we have our own little phenology trail at the Maples farm that's got about 12 different species. And again, I test drove this with our AmeriCorps fellows last year, and it would be perfect for students or any other community group to take that on, something like that.
There's a really good climate connection you can do through Nature's Notebook.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
demonstrating the shifting of the phenology.
Exactly. And we're hoping that we're going to end up with years worth of data that we can actually graph and say, oh my God, the plants are blooming 2 weeks early at our farm, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting. A couple other things we're doing point counts for riparian bird species. We're always looking for people who are good birders who can help us with that. We do have a set of wildlife cameras looking at what wildlife is using our hedgerows at the farm, and that's a fairly time-intensive project that requires people who are interested in wildlife cameras to sort through a bunch of photos of what we're getting. And then we do soil testing. All of our projects, our agricultural fields, as well as our places where we have hedgerows and other habitat projects, we do regular soil testing to look at changes in soil carbon over time. So that's sort of the nitty-gritty of what we have as opportunities at our farm.
And so we really have three main questions that we're hoping to talk about today. One is, how can we get students involved in citizen science activities in a space that doesn't have much access to technology? Second one for me is, how do we create pre and post survey questions surrounding climate change that is not too daunting for a student to answer, understanding the things that we saw in the Lancet study. It's very scary. And then the third and final one is, how can we get people more involved in the citizen science work we are doing on our farm in Yolo County? We have a lot of research happening, but we don't necessarily have the staff capacity to handle all of it. And we want people to have access to the awesome citizen science work that we're doing on our property. So that's kind of what we're thinking about today. And with that, we can round it out. If anybody has any questions first, we can answer some questions, then we can move into discussion if anybody has any.
Those are great discussion questions.
I'll check the chat.
I don't want to dominate because I'm in the room. If folks are in the chat, feel free to raise your hand or just jump right in or type things in.
I was gonna say, do we want to go back one?
Just to see these.
Yeah.
But while people get their questions going, I think this is such a cool list because it is both a range of topics and a range of kind of experience and training levels needed in order to do it. There are some things that are very entry level and some things that you kind of need a little more expertise to get into. And it's so great that it can all happen in one place in terms of bringing people there and exposing them to the range of citizen science opportunities on a working farm.
Right.
So that's super exciting. And in terms of engaging people more physically there at the headquarters, I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of that so far. Like, I assume you have various things that attract people to come visit you for events and programming and all that kind of thing. And is the challenge squeezing this in, or is the challenge creating opportunities that are just about the citizen science as opposed to all the other things? Or like how do you see it fitting in with everything else when you think about engaging more people?
Yeah. So to be honest, we haven't ever done targeted outreach in order to attract citizen science scientists per se. We haven't put a call out and said, you know, we have these projects. If you're a citizen scientist or you want to get involved, contact us. We haven't done that yet, although we will.
Yeah.
What we've done is we've gotten people who have contacted us and said, I would like to volunteer, or I'm doing a Eagle Scout project and I need some hours, or, you know, that type of thing. So it's been more passive on our side. I would suspect if we do start doing targeted outreach, we will get, you know, plenty of folks, especially with UC Davis right here. Get plenty of folks who are interested.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's also ways that Allie and I have been talking about, ways we can engage the SLEWS students when they're there. So we have a couple of SLEWS projects that will be going in this fall. So we're gonna have students on site for, I don't know how many total field days.
8.
Yeah. And so, you know, there are probably ways we can take those students while they're there and have them collect data on a particular project. We've had SLEWS students do the bird box monitoring in the past. We could certainly involve students in our biochar project where we're monitoring greenhouse gas emissions. That's pretty fun. So it's kind of a matter of us getting organized to do it.
Yeah.
I would say.
And I think the issue that we also face is, you know, so while I engage the high school students on this property, you know, it's normally like a scheduled day, right? They don't have to go to class because they're at our field trip, basically. But when it comes to a typical day and it's not a part of my SLEWS program, the question becomes, how are they even going to be able to do any citizen science work when they have to be in school? So oftentimes when we're targeting people, I saw there was a question asking about like what age group are we really targeting for this kind of work. I would say there's no specific age range. It's always a benefit to teach high school students what actual field science looks like. And also we recognize that their school schedule doesn't necessarily fit with our working schedule, because a lot of the times, you know, you want to get this research done in the morning when it's not hot. You know, you want to make sure if we have a rain event, especially in the spring, that we get the research done the next day. It's really thinking about a flexible schedule. So sometimes high school students don't work with that. So that's where we're looking at integrating, you know, either undergrads or graduate students, kind of thinking about that age range, knowing that they're going to be the most likely to be able to do it. Oh yeah, and 4-H is definitely something that we've talked about, but not engaged as much either in that respect. So
Yeah. A couple of questions come, and I feel like I'm
Go ahead,
taking
yeah.
somebody's facilitator duties
I
here,
am.
but
No, that's totally fine.
one question from Shulong, who's a postdoc who works with us, is she says she's very curious about supporting youth's leadership through the project. Can you describe a little bit more about how you achieve that in the program? How do you see citizen science having the potential to foster students' leadership, and in what ways?
I think we're seeing a lot these days that students aren't actually getting that access to what research truly looks like out in the field. So when I was growing up and thinking about what it meant to be a biologist, for example, doing research, all I could envision was a lab and sitting in a lab using test tubes, kind of doing samples day after day, and not actually thinking about what this type of field research could look like. And so, especially with the development of new technology, we've talked with a lot of teachers about the use of GIS, the use of drones, talking about how we can relate that to citizen science and understanding like carbon sequestration rates. We want to integrate citizen science more into our day-to-day programming. So with the SLEWS program, a student gets to go to that site 3 times throughout the year. During different parts of the year, which can be a really cool experience. And it's a short experience for them. They only get like a 9 to 2 time period to kind of do this, like short exposure. But it could really benefit what their idea of science is and what that looks like for them. And maybe even apply the things that they're learning in the books to the actual outdoor field. And so that's, at least for us, where we're looking at integrating citizen science when it comes to the leadership aspect of things. Our program has a lot of icebreaker activities that we do, community building, team building activities. And I think we are working to show students that, while this is work can be fun. And there is a way to take what you're learning here, for example, like the Project Nest Watch, and do that in your local community. If you have a bird box at school, how can that look? What about when it comes to doing streamlined bee monitoring in your backyard if you have a garden? How can this kind of integrate? So I think there's many different avenues that we could take it. We're kind of looking for people's suggestions, especially because we haven't done as much citizen science in my programming. We do it when we're at our property, but when I'm out in the community, we don't necessarily have the same level of access nor the buy-in from the landowner that you might want. So balancing those is kind of tricky.
Interesting.
I wonder how teachers could play a role in this too. Like if teachers come with their class to a SLEWS day and we do a citizen science activity, those teachers could take that activity with them and then help the students get started doing that elsewhere.
Yeah.
Like the nest boxes would be a good example. If they have nest boxes at their school, we could do the training, even if it's short, and then give the teacher the resources and then have them, enable them to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a piece of it, especially like we have curriculum that we've built in the past that we've, I don't know, has existed for a while, that we used to give to teachers. I think that's something that we're trying to revamp again. I think also that's where something like our Caring for Our Watershed program comes into play, where students are seeing the impact that they're having on their watershed, which kickstarts their potential project that they want to launch through our grant program, and have the opportunity to kind of do things like putting in a compost system in their school, installing bird boxes to help with the local wildlife. So we're hoping the citizen science program aspect of this not only encourages students to do this in their community, but maybe at their actual school and think about the larger projects so they could actually complete.
Yeah, so we've worked a lot. Yeah, we've done a lot of that pairing, and it actually works really well of having it as a pre and post trips. So they experience a certain programming or platform on their school campus. I know that Nest Watch is super fun because you get to take those great pictures, but even with just regular eBird, Cornell is really building out a robust way for students to analyze and interpret their open source data as a means to understand climate change in their area, and looking at migratory patterns and bird movements and on a global scale. And so one of the great things about like a biodiversity monitoring program, or even just birds specifically, is that students can really zoom in on their campus and then compare it to another site, compare resources, and then also scale out globally and really look at the patterns that we're seeing and be able, because one of the things that I was thinking of for classroom engagement as well is if you had a landing page on your website that just said, here are the current data sets that are coming out of our farm. How does that compare to what you're seeing? How does that compare to your local area? and it would really allow the classroom teacher to make a lot of different
Yeah.
connections by having that synthesis, because a lot of the conversations that teachers have and some of the tension is around where do you find the data sets? Where do I find the data to be able to compare? But if you have it all in one location,
Right.
then you can ask the students like, okay, given this data set, what questions could you ask? What
Right.
questions could you answer? What other data do we need? Where else do we need to look, or what do we need to gather ourselves?
Right. That would be great. I love that idea of having like a little storage place on our website for our data sets.
And then students
Yeah,
could see the
yeah.
different, visualizations of the different projects. The other one that I was thinking, especially in thinking about connection to the watershed, is that NASA's GLOBE program has a lot of opportunities for citizen science engagement that looks at restoration in different spaces.
Mhm.
And what the GLOBE project is doing is taking a lot of our satellite imagery that they capture and ground truthing on a hyper local scale.
Mhm.
And so students see that connection between this really large scale climate change monitoring program that NASA is doing using satellites, and then still needing that really local on the ground. How does this connect? Are we seeing the same thing? Because often those larger snapshots aren't giving the clearest picture of what's happening, especially if you started a program like GLOBE that could do pre and post work on restoration in a lot of the SLEWS or the riparian areas.
Mhm.
And then the last one I was thinking was, if your wildlife cameras, if you need high school students to digest some of them, setting up a Zooniverse account.
Dang, I used to.
Oh, did I say?
I was waiting to add that one in,
Zooniverse
but
is
yes.
like intended for that, for people to do large scale dumping of
wow.
imagery and data sets. They do a lot of the spot the meteor, with NASA kind of things, but they also, you can put up webcam data, and a lot of times they just ask for people to sort by like animal present and not present. I mean,
Yeah.
some of them are very specific, looking for a particular animal,
Right.
and all you do is click yes or no. Is it on
Yeah.
the screen?
That's
We've
great.
had graduate students set that up for high school students to participate in. Looking at sage grouse mating behavior in the Eastern Sierras, and there are all these great supports for setting up a project, because the platform just kind of makes it doable for you.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah,
That's a
it'd be
great
fun.
suggestion.
There's some other wildlife camera platforms out there that I know less about, so there are a few that,
Right.
that can get
Right.
people engaged.
Right.
And you don't have to do it with just students either. You can just have it a public project.
Mhm.
You can share it and anyone can make an account and do all that sorting for you.
That's great.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
But then that's a fun one to have linked like to a landing page on your website of, most spotted on our Zooniverse, like, oh, coolest thing tagged on our webcam this week,
Yeah,
Right.
Lacey just said that the
Mhm.
class she teaches did that with some of the Stebbins Gold Canyon Reserve.
Oh, right, at Berryessa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and that was engaging some of the people as part of that project, that Zooniverse project also created materials for elementary students to be able to engage
Oh,
with some of that
nice.
too.
And I'd like to make a little space for a couple of the questions that are coming in here. So Yin Kwan, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, apologies if not, is asking, when you say technology challenges, do you mean no or limited Wi-Fi access, or lack of mobile devices, or inability to use the software, or like where's that coming from?
So it could be a multitude of things.
Okay.
Sometimes teachers tell students do not bring your phone.
Mhm.
Sometimes we have zero service at all. Like I will not even have the ability to text a partner that I need assistance.
Mhm.
And then in addition to that, even if we do have service, it tends to be limited. So like if we ask them to pull something up on their phone, it doesn't translate very easily, because we don't have like an iPad or anything that typically can be used for citizen science pretty easily. And the phones oftentimes are not very well, like, they don't handle the transition from like a computer to a phone very easily.
Mhm.
Some things do like an app, but it can be challenging to have students download the app prior to coming.
Yeah.
And so when they actually get there, taking the time to download the app, we're like, how much time is it gonna take? Because we have a very limited amount of time with students comparatively to other programs. So that's our biggest technology challenge. And one thing that we're doing right now to kind of combat that is if teachers do have something like a drone, they're able to bring that and we can utilize their training of that in our other aspects of citizen science. So taking pictures of the space throughout their 3 days with us so that they can take that and apply research implementation at their school with it. And they can actually parse out the area of land that we've restored and see how much that would factor in with carbon sequestration, how that might increase pollinators, what that might look like in water retention by just looking at the photo. I know there's some softwares that can like pull land mass and say, this is how much you're increasing by just doing a small transect on a computer.
I would think the Xerces protocol would be pretty good for those 3 field trips over the course of the year, right? Have you tried that?
So part of the reason we haven't is because we don't always plant on the first and second day. So sometimes we're going to a space and there's no plants because we're the ones planting. We install the irrigation, we plant the actual plants. And then also typically you don't see a huge benefit of the planting until the following year. So we're going with little plant species where there might not be an existing hedgerow to work with. So it's a pretty barren land. What we have found so far that we've done is some soil tests, like that can sometimes be a possibility. Occasionally, we've also had access to riparian areas where we can do water testing. There was a space in southern Sacramento that was on the by Franklin High School, Franklin Channel area, where I tried to sample macroinvertebrates and there was absolutely nothing in that waterway. Okay, it's an experience.
That says something too.
Yeah. So, you know, there's been a couple alternatives, but it's a weird space to be in that.
I would think eBird checklists, you don't need any technology for that.
Yeah.
And you can develop checklists that are specific to the area you're going.
Okay.
And that's quick. It's like top 10 list of birds.
It prints it out for you.
Yeah, cool.
You can scoop an area, sorry. I didn't
And
mean
seeing
to
that
interrupt.
3 different times
Yeah.
over the course of the year would be really cool too, because
Right.
you'd have such different bird life.
Right.
Not necessarily as a result of your hedgerow planting, but at least seasonally sort of seeing that shift would be cool.
Yeah.
And also when students are looking at the impacts that they have had, it's one of those first ones that becomes really obvious too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting for students to look at here's the biodiversity, here's the bird population we're seeing in this space that has the plant life that we're going to be implementing. You know, here's the changes we're going to be making. Here's the location that's already got that built out. Let's look at the bird populations that are there. What are we not seeing in our space? And then monitor whether or not you see those shifts.
Yeah.
You know,
how
like if
long
you
does
build
that
it, they
take?
will come.
How long does that normally take, do you know?
About a year. I mean, it's like the birds figure it out pretty darn quick, especially if you add water.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like,
Go figure.
Just add water.
yeah, I mean, they figure it out really quick. I mean, we had a monitoring program on a school campus, and the very next school year, the species diversity was dramatically different.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, like the very next year. So we had a couple of questions in
Yeah.
the chat that were sort of a little bit connected, and I'm gonna sort of synthesize Catherine and Alyssa's. The question was around, first, do you have Spanish language programming or materials? And have you connected to other content areas other than just science instruction?
Yes, so we have some Spanish language translations, especially because we have such a large population that speaks Spanish in the Yolo region especially. I would say we don't really have any on staff who are as capable in doing those translations. We worked really well with our AmeriCorps members who all, thank the Lord, spoke Spanish fluently. So they created a lot of really cool Spanish translations for us that I still think we need to work on. But we do understand that we do have kind of a disconnect sometimes. We try to take the curriculum that we have and make it readable for students. You know, there's these big words like habitat restoration that even the typical adult doesn't know. And so we try to break those down in very basic terms that can make it accessible to many. And my hope is over time that we can continue developing our multilingual aspects of things. What I think has been really cool in the past is if we do have a student that is very, very new to the English language. Typically within that class, there's a student who is always willing to help with Spanish translations and actually really excited to take on that leadership role. So they'll assist with the student being able to communicate and understand what work we're doing. And it also shares with us some words that we could pick up and help utilize to be able to communicate in the future as well. And in terms of like the other aspect of the question of, do we ever do things that are outside of just like straight science? You know, with other grammar aspects of things, yes. I think we are, like, our goal is to get students into the field of environmental science. But we also are just generally building their leadership skills, their communication skills, understanding that most of the students that we work with are just starting to figure out what they want to do. You know, we know that not all of them are going to go into environmental science, but this can still help them in their career regardless of what they're doing. If they're going to vocational school, four-year institution, going straight into a career, this is an open opportunity to learn techniques that are going to be useful even after high school.
Yeah, I think there's so many goals you can design around, and so that's a tricky choice. I mean, if a goal is to get people doing citizen science in their own lives, that's one thing. If a goal is to get teachers to see lots of different curriculum connections, that's not that those are mutually exclusive, but they have very different implications for what you're trying to do. Or if your goal is to get people coming more regularly to do this stuff on your own property, like, and so I think that's something to be clear about as you're making choices. But the cool thing is I feel like all of that is totally reasonable as a goal, because you have so much richness here. And I think that one thing that's cool is the diversity of projects you have happening at your headquarters is just so, I mean, you were talking before about imagining science as just a thing that happens in a lab. Like, I think there's also the perspective of what happens on a farm. It can be really broadened by this set of activities, and that's just exciting.
And I think that's where we work to educate a lot of local landowners too, because also local landowners don't even know that they can get their hedgerows put in pretty much for free. So for those of you who live across the United States, you have the Natural Resource Conservation Service, also known as NRCS. We work with them very often to help educate landowners on what conservation practices they can put into their land that will not only help benefit their crops, but also the community as a whole. And so they have a really cool program called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also known as EQIP. And this program basically pays landowners to put in native plants along the edges of their fields, thinking about conservation practices like putting in bird boxes to help give back to the environment. And if you're getting paid to do it, it's free for you, and also you get SLEWS involved, because normally what they'll say is it's the labor part that they don't want to deal with, and then the maintenance issues. Well, students will come in and handle the labor part, no problem, and you're paying to get put in like the irrigation and plants. And then the only thing you have to deal with is the maintenance. And, you know, I feel like these days that's still a question of like, how do they handle the maintenance, but they're more likely to do it if they're educated in those concepts. And so I think that's where mostly when we're doing tours on our headquarters property, it is surrounded around like what practices are we doing. But I think you'd mentioned in the chat wanting to do a citizen science tour. I think that could be a really cool, tour to have, because we don't. Like,
we'll be your guinea pigs, we'll come.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely talk about it, but we don't actively do it when they're there. And it would be really cool to like say, hey, let's do some citizen science while we're here and learn about what this is.
We have this goal of doing essentially a self-guided tour type thing where we have signage with QR codes, so that a visitor to the farm who just wants to look around would be able to, you know, call up our phenology trail or look at our pollinator data just by scanning that code. So that's something that, should we get the funding in this next round of funding requests, we can get that going as well, because we get a ton of visitors, a lot of people coming.
Solano County has the Explore Solano that's very similar. It's the letter Explore, and so they have an app for different hiking trails, but then they also have QR codes along a variety of open spaces. And they're trying to set it up so that all of Solano County has one of those trails within walking distance of schools.
Oh, that's cool.
That's like their end goal. And so like that could just be a template, you know, because it's set up extremely simply initially, and then they're just building it out from there. But I was, I know we only have 3 minutes, so please tell me if there was something in the chat, but I was thinking about your question about pre and post survey questions for students. And we took a lot about like climate anxiety and attending to SEL needs and things like that. And one of the things that I was thinking of to sort of have it framed more of a positive, empowering is just saying, you know, how do you feel about these statements, and being like, I am able to make change. I can have an impact on, you know, climate change resilience in my local community. And some of those just really empowering statements, I think would allow you to see those pre and post, you know, growth aspects without being too triggering.
Because I think also, so SLEWS works in Yolo, Solano, Sacramento, and San Joaquin counties. So 4 major ones in Northern California. And I think there's a very big difference between like the students that we interact with in Sacramento versus those like down in San Joaquin. You have students who are talking more about climate change typically in Sacramento than you do in San Joaquin. And it's like, when you bring up these questions, they're like, what are you talking about? This isn't something that we talk about here. And I'm like, well, we got to talk about this. And so I think that's great. Yeah, empowerment statements are huge.
One small idea I suggested in the chat, but I'll just verbalize, is there is a California Naturalist course offered in Woodland through Tuolumne, and those folks, and I have not taken it, so I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but the California Naturalist program, if you're familiar with it, has these capstone projects. It seems like some of the work that you're talking about, setting up like a QR code thing, that could be an awesome capstone project.
Yeah,
if you have
that's
the
a great
right
idea.
person coming out.
Yeah, I'll reach out to them, because that would be great to have some capstoners.
Yeah, and there's Lacey Gearhart teaches Wild Davis here also, so I don't know how, well, that's probably different. Anyway, I keep speaking for other people, but just ideas.
Well, we have our, go to the last slide again. We have our contact information up here on the screen if anybody wants to reach out directly to me or Allie. We're both at landbasedlearning.org. So
yeah. And I think especially like if you're local to this region and want to be a mentor for SLEWS, please reach out. I need 70 mentors this year. So, and we have 10 projects across 3 different counties.
Wow.
So really excited to get people out with us.
All right.
Yeah, and you guys could also be speakers if you don't want to be mentors. We are looking for speakers as well that just can come and speak to the students about what you do, and maybe engage in citizen science as well with them.
That'd be fun. All right.
Well, that's perfect timing. We're right on the hour. So I want to thank you all for coming and presenting on this topic. It was really fun, and I hope people on Zoom got inspired. And the link again will be shared after the webinar. And you can stay informed of future events by using the link in the chat that Diego is going to put in there shortly. But you can stick around with us and continue the conversation for a bit, or jump off. But thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That
Thank
was
you.
awesome.